Hey guys, it's Victoria, and I just wanted to come on and give you guys sort of my background on breastfeeding and formula feeding, I guess, too, for my first two children, so that you can get an idea of where I'm coming from going into having baby number 3 and my plans and goals for feeding this baby. So when I had Noah in 2010, I was working I was self-employed, but I was working pretty much full-time sort of hours on top of staying home with him. I owned an event planning business, and I'll post a link below to my sort of about me video, which talks a little bit more about that. So I co-owned an event planning company, and we, when he was born, it was March, so it was sort of our downtime. So my goal was to breastfeed, but I wasn't somebody who went into it with any hard set goals. It was sort of the approach that I'll try, I'll give it my best, and if it doesn't work, that's fine. I was not in any way opposed to formula at all, and I'm still not. So things went really well for him, with him for about the first, I guess 6 weeks or so. And then I was struggling with getting him to sleep, and people were telling me to try a bottle, try formula. And so I did. And knowing now, then what I know now, it was probably just a growth spurt. We probably would have got through it without a bottle. But in the back of my mind was the idea that I was going to be picking up hours really soon when it came to work, when I got back into things. And I needed to have milk or something to feed him when I wasn't around. So with that idea, we started giving him a bottle of formula once a day before bed. Matthew would do the bath, give him that bottle, and then I would pump, and that would allow me to build up a supply to freeze. So that's sort of how we went along for a little while. And then once I started going back to work a little bit more, I did have that built up stash for him, which was great, but it was really hard for me to pump because when I was out doing events, which were mostly weddings, it's kind of hard to sneak away for 20 minutes and pump, and then you have to worry about storing and all of that. So it wasn't the best work path to go with breastfeeding, I guess. So around 4 months with him, he started to really fight the breast. He would go for a couple of minutes really, really well, and then unlatch and scream and fuss. And it was the middle of the summer. It was like 35 degrees Celsius. It's probably like 90 something Fahrenheit. And we sort of both came to the conclusion, I think, that it wasn't working for us at that time. So at that point, I think we were down to only nursing a couple of times a day. And I often wonder if I hadn't introduced that one bottle a day, if we would have been more successful breastfeeding longer, because I think he kind of got used to that and got used to how easy it was to drink from a bottle, and that kind of made him more of a lazy nurser, and he got frustrated easier when the milk didn't come as fast. So about 4 months, we weaned completely to bottles and formula, and that's what we did for the rest of the time with him. And we got rid of bottles with him around a year, 13 months or so. We completely cut out bottles altogether. So that was sort of my experience with him. Now, when I had Alexandria, it was completely different. I wasn't really working anymore. We were sort of just finishing off the clients that we had, and then my business partner and I had decided to sell the business at the end of that year. So in that sense, my lifestyle was a lot more conducive to breastfeeding because I was home, and I didn't need to be gone for 12-hour stretches, and I didn't have to worry about leaving milk for those types of situations. So I think we were a lot more set up for success. Plus this time, and I don't really know what the change of heart was for me, why this time I was so much more committed to breastfeeding for a longer time. I think part of it may have been that she was a preemie, and in a way I sort of felt that maybe my body let her down, because I do have a condition that probably resulted in her coming early. And I think maybe because of that, I wanted to be able to provide for her in another way. And the cost and the convenience were huge factors for me. I have a bit of a different approach to breastfeeding, or at least I did for her, than I think a lot of people who breastfeed for a longer time, which I'll get into later. But Um, with her, she was a preemie, so she didn't even try to nurse for the first, she was 34 weeks, so she wasn't super early. I think it was about the first 48 hours that we didn't try to nurse at all. And then I got to hold her, and the nurse looked and said, "Is she rooting?" And she really was. So we tried nursing, and she did latch. And so it was basically, working towards full-time nursing before she was able to be discharged from the hospital. And I will say that my hospital is incredibly supportive about breastfeeding. Sometimes I think they might be a little bit too supportive or too pushy when it comes to breastfeeding, but the support is there, which I know a lot of hospitals don't have. They have a class you can take for free before your baby comes. They have lactation consultants that meet with you in the hospital, and then they have a mother baby clinic that you can call 24/7, and you can make appointments. You can go in, you can have your baby weighed, they can help you. We have tremendous resources when it comes to breastfeeding support in our city, which is wonderful. So we worked to get towards getting her to nurse before she could be discharged, and it was sort of a matter of nursing and then topping up with she was tube fed for the first, well, most of the time she was in there, at least the first week and a half. She was only in the NICU for 12 days, so it really wasn't a long time. And then by the end, when she got sent home, she was able to nurse around the clock. And then we had appointments, I think, every couple of days for the first maybe week or so, just to have her weighed, make sure she was gaining. And she did wonderful. So that was great. But on top of that, since I wasn't able to nurse right away, I was pumping every 3 hours around the clock. And then when I got discharged, of course, I didn't stay at the hospital 24 hours. I'd be with her during the day, then I'd go home. So I was pumping every 3 hours through the night. And then they also wanted me to pump after I nursed her, because preemies often aren't very efficient nursers. And then when they start to gain, then they start to demand more, and they want the milk to be there. They don't want, normally with a full-term baby, when they go through a growth spurt and they start to demand more milk, it's okay if it takes a day or so for your supply to increase. But with a preemie, they want the milk to be there when the baby wants it. So I was nursing and then pumping after every feeding. And then when I wasn't with her, I was pumping. So I ended up with a ton of frozen milk. I actually donated a bunch to a friend of mine, which was so nice to be able to do. And I ended up with a big oversupply. Like once she got home and she started to nurse better and to gain better, and I didn't really have to worry about pumping, I had so much milk, so I had to work on decreasing my supply. Actually, I was really lucky in that I didn't have to struggle with any supply issues. So yeah, when she came home, she was a great nurser. We really were successful from the beginning. Her latch was really good. I did use a nipple shield at first. Preemies, their mouths are really small, and it just made it easier for her to latch on. So I used that until she came home from the hospital. And then every now and then, especially in the night, I found I think I'd maybe be a little bit more impatient and she'd be more impatient, and we would struggle to get her to latch. And then I'd say, okay, I'll just try it. But it didn't take long before we got rid of that too. So that was really good. And yeah, so I nursed her for a full year, and she was a baby, and I'll get into my approach to breastfeeding. She was a baby who could give or take. Like, she never really asked for it, so I would feed her at mealtime, and that was about it. So it was really, I'm so lucky that it was really easy to wean her. She wasn't really attached to it, and I wasn't really attached to it. So we cut just one feeding at a time. I introduced whole milk in a sippy cup around probably 9.5, 10 months. And then from 10 months to a year, we just cut one nursing session at a time, replaced it with a sippy cup of milk. And by a year, she was completely on milk. So it was a huge accomplishment for me, and to be able to nurse for a year. And that sort of, at first it was 6 months, and then in the back of my head I said, I really want to do this for a year. I want to be able to make it at least to the point where she could go on whole milk. The cost savings was huge. And I ended up, I had some struggles with her. I guess it was with her latch and with bleeding and a lot of cracked nipples and stuff, which is not fun. And I actually have some damage to my left side that, it's all healed, but it never quite healed. It doesn't look quite the way it used to. So I do have some fears about how things will go with this baby, because I did have a lot of issues with that side throughout with her. I had a couple of problems with blocked ducts, and I actually got like a nipple blister on that side. And then I think when that healed, that's sort of where the malformation ended up. So hopefully things are all good for this baby. So I guess I'll just talk about my approach to breastfeeding. And I want to say that I don't think there's anything wrong with any approaches. If you're somebody who wants to nurse on demand and is happy with your baby nursing whenever they want, wherever they want, that is totally fine. If you're somebody who wants to formula feed from day one and not try breastfeeding, that's totally fine. I have no judgment for any way you want to feed your baby, as long as it works for you and for them. But for me, I wasn't somebody who wanted to nurse for comfort. It wasn't something that I used as a way to bond, really. I mean, the first few months, of course, you nurse them whenever and wherever. And Alexandria was a big cluster feeder, really bad in the evenings. From like 7 o'clock, I think for like 3 hours, she would nurse for like 20 minutes, and then I would try to put her down, and she'd wake up crying. I put her on the other side, 20 minutes, put her down, she'd cry, switch her back over, and it just went on and on and on. And she wouldn't take a soother, and then eventually around 4 months, she started to suck her thumb, and that really helped cut back on the cluster feeding, because she just wanted to suck. She wasn't feeding, actually nursing. So the first few months, my whole approach is irrelevant, because you do what you have to do to keep the baby happy and content. So then I guess probably around the 4-month mark, where she started to suck her thumb, it really, and I'm lucky that I had a baby who was okay with this. I'm sure there's other babies that demand more when it comes to nursing. We had a routine of, we would wake up and nurse, then she would have a nap, or we would go out and do something, and I would nurse at lunch, and she would have a nap in the afternoon. I would nurse when she'd wake up, I'd nurse at supper time, and then before bed. And that was really how it went from early, like 4 months, until we weaned. And she was never one to have a really strict morning nap. I think because we had an older child, we were out a lot in the morning. So she would come in the car seat. She would sometimes nap in the car. But I never really needed to nurse her in the off times. Of course, there were exceptions, growth spurts, or she wasn't feeling well, or things like that. But in general, she was happy with nursing those set times. And I wasn't a mom who, if she was upset, nursing was not the way I would comfort her. I would, sing to her, cuddle her, do other things. It wasn't the way I opted to comfort her. If that's the way that you comfort your baby, that's totally fine. And I know that really, really works. But I think because I didn't use it in that way, it made it a lot easier when it came time to wean, because she wasn't attached to it in like an emotional way. I really use nursing for nutrition and not much else above that. And of course it's a wonderful bonding experience, and I did enjoy having that one-on-one time, but it wasn't something that when I stopped I was really upset about, because I didn't feel like I was losing that bond. We would still, before bed, we would do a book and a song, and then we would nurse, and then she would go down, and usually she was awake when she would go down. And of course, major disclaimer, I was really lucky that I had a baby that was okay with that. And this baby, who knows, maybe she will be completely different. I have no idea. I'm really open to whatever comes, but that was how things sort of worked with Alexandria. So that was really nice. It just made it really easy to wean at the end for her. My parents' house, and Noah's out skating with my dad, and my mom's got all her Christmas decorations down. Say, look at my hair! She got a whole bunch of Minnie Mouse accessories for Christmas. It was supposed to sort of go to one side and not be such a... But when I got her dressed, it kind of got mixed up, so cute. Do you love Minnie Mouse? Who's your favorite? Who's your favorite? Goofy?
No, Mickey.
Mickey's your favorite? Minnie. Who else? So we'll probably wrap this up. Pete? You like Pete? I like Pete too. So that's sort of my breastfeeding journey with my 2 babies. And careful. When this one comes, our plan is to breastfeed and to breastfeed for a year. Who knows what will happen and what her idea will be, but that is our goal. I remember I did go to some Lalesh League meetings, even though my approach to breastfeeding was like polar opposite to their approach. I did find it a good resource, and I found it a good place to go, a safe place with, they didn't really experience any judgment or anything, even though I did sometimes keep my opinions to myself. The instructor said that when you breastfeed when you bottle feed, the learning curve or difficulty level is like a straight line. It never gets easier, it never gets harder. But with breastfeeding, the difficulty level starts out up here and then gradually goes to here because it gets so much easier. You were watching Minnie on TV. No? This child is obsessed. Minnie on my phone? Oh, you want my phone? Alright, I think I'm going to have to give my phone away. So if you guys have any questions or comments, leave them below. And I look forward to updating you all on how breastfeeding goes with baby number 3 in not too long of a time. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.